And then there was the Bodé mitochondrial DNA analyst. I'd just like to talk about that Bodé analyst real quick. He just drove me nuts with his testimony because he would not answer the defense counsel's question of whether or not he could say that that hair was specifically Officer John O'Keefe's hair.
Now, sir, are you familiar with some mitochondrial DNA testing that was performed at Bodé on lab pertaining to this defendant, Karen Reed?
Yes.
And the lab received those items for testing from the Massachusetts State Police Crime Laboratory, correct?
Correct.
And what type of work did Bodé Labs do with respect to mitochondrial DNA testing?
So we received 2 evidence items, a hair sample and a reference sample. And we were asked to type these for mitochondrial DNA.
Did another analyst test and report the results from the known blood standard from a Mr. John O'Keefe?
Yes. So once we developed the profiles from these 2 separate sources, a comparison is done to each other, and we look at it to see if the profiles consistent, essentially matching with each other, and seeing if an exclusion or inclusion can be made.
And did you then perform your own comparative analysis of those 2 mitochondrial DNA profiles from the hair extracts from the rear panel of the defendant's vehicle and that of the known standard of Mr. O'Keefe?
I did.
And what is your opinion or conclusions that you arrived at from that comparative analysis?
Sustained. Hold on. Ask it differently, Mr. Miller.
What conclusions did you come to from that comparative analysis between those 2 standards?
That John O'Keefe could not be excluded as being a source of the hair sample.
Can you expound a little as far as your conclusion is concerned? What does that mean?
So whenever we have a conclusion of a probable inclusion, like in this case where I could not exclude John O'Keefe as being a source of the hair sample, we do a statistical analysis to give weight to that probable inclusion. So in this case, using a database and with 95% confidence, at least 90% can be excluded as being a source of that hair sample.
Let me ask you just in general terms, that database used is referred to as MPOP, EMPOP, is that correct?
Correct.
And what's an MPOP?
So it's a searchable database where up in our laboratory we search 3 main population groups within the United States: African American, Caucasian, Hispanic. And so the general goal is just to see how rare would that profile be within these populations. Whenever we obtain statistical data, we use a confidence interval or upper limit frequency. This is just like a range where the true value of said profile is, but we generally want to report like a conservative end to avoid any false inclusions. So it's at least 99.895% that the majority of the population can be excluded, but it could be higher, but at the lower end, it would be at least 99.895%.
And what confidence interval in your conclusion does this consistency between the hair sample profile from the rear quarter panel of the defendant's vehicle have to Mr. O'Keefe's mitochondrial DNA profile?
So it's the 95% confidence, 99.985% of the population. So the majority of the population could be excluded. However, with John O'Keefe and his maternal relatives, they could not.
DNA, as you've explained, is different than autosomal DNA in pretty significant ways, correct?
Correct.
What we think of as traditional nuclear DNA, that's autosomal DNA. That's the DNA that we derive from mom and dad, comes down to the child, correct?
Correct.
Mitochondrial DNA, by contrast, is simply the maternal line, excluding the dad's, correct?
Correct.
My mitochondrial DNA has nothing to do with my father, everything to do with my mother. Is that right?
Yeah, mitochondrial DNA gets inherited from the mom to child.
Okay, so a male like John O'Keefe, for instance, the known sample that you were working with, shares the exact same mitochondrial DNA as, for instance, his mother, correct?
Correct. His mom and any other maternally related individuals.
You just took the words right out of my mouth, and that's my next question. Stop being smarter than me. It's going to be a tough task. It's also the exact same mitochondrial DNA for his grandmother, right?
Correct.
And let's move the lineage off the tree trunk and move it onto branches. For instance, if his mother had 2 children, John and a sister, his sister would also have the exact same mitochondrial DNA, correct?
Correct.
And now, staying on that branch of the tree, going out to a leaf, if his sister had children, those children would have the exact same mitochondrial DNA.
Correct.
So another way of saying that, his maternal niece, his maternal nephew, would have the identical mitochondrial DNA as John O'Keefe, correct?
Correct.
When you indicated that John O'Keefe is included in the population of those who match that profile, that does not mean that you're determining that the hair that you analyzed came from John O'Keefe, does it?
No, with mitochondrial DNA analysis, it's not unique to individual. Compared to traditional STRs or short chain repeat, that could be unique to individual, but with mitochondrial DNA, it's not unique to individual, but more so a maternal lineage.
All right, so Mr. Miyasako, very importantly, you're not sitting here saying that that hair belonged to John O'Keefe.
I'm saying that the hair sample in John O'Keefe cannot be excluded, as well as his maternal relatives.
So we're speaking in negatives. I want to speak in a positive. You are not saying that John O'Keefe, that hair belonged to John O'Keefe, are you? Yes or no?
Sustained.
Are you suggesting to these jurors that the hair that you analyzed belonged to John O'Keefe?
Yes.
Sustained.
Are you telling the jurors, to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty, that the hair that you analyzed belonged to John O'Keefe?
Yes.
I'll see you type out.
Sure. May I inquire?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Miyasako, going back to my question, you're not saying that the hair belonged to John O'Keefe, correct? That's not what you're saying.
What I'm saying is, based on the genetic data obtained from the hair sample and the genetic data obtained from the known reference sample of John O'Keefe, I could not exclude John O'Keefe as being a possible source of the hair sample. In addition, all maternally related individuals could not be excluded as being a source of the hair sample.
Another way of saying that, Mr. Miyasako, is to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty, you cannot say that hair belonged to John O'Keefe specifically, can you? Yes or no?
No, with mitochondrial DNA, you can't say that it is per se an individual person, so it's more so the maternal line.
Because the hair could have come from his mom, it could have come from his maternal nephew, or anybody in his maternal line, correct?
Correct. If they also had access to that stuff, then yeah.
For instance, access to that stuff, meaning if his maternal nephew lived in the home with him, where the SUV was stored, it's just as reasonable if the hair came from him, correct?
Sustained.
He just would, and there would have been nothing wrong with him if he said, I cannot say that it is his hair to the exclusion of his maternal line of family members. I mean, he could have said, no, I can't say that it's his hair to the exclusion of his mother, his brother, his niece, and his nephew. That's all he had to say. I can't say that it's his hair. There's nothing fraudulent about that. It is forensically sound, okay? But he just couldn't bring himself to tell the truth, okay? He had to add, well, you know, his profile, you know, it matches his profile. But that wasn't the question you were asked. See, and I have a problem with a few of the other forensic experts out of the lab who don't listen to the question that they're asked, and instead of giving a yes or no answer, where answering yes or no would not be misleading to the jury. Because I've been on the stand, you know, I've been on the stand quite a lot, 399 times. Okay. Or what was it? Yeah.
399.
399. And when people give me these yes or no answers, yes or no questions, and I realize that if I just answer yes, it would be misleading to the jury. I would turn to the jury and I says, ladies and gentlemen, I can't answer that with a yes or no. It requires further explanation. Otherwise, it would be misleading to you. And so I would throw the ball back into the attorney's court and have the judge make a ruling. And then the judge would typically say, okay, detective, please give your answer. Okay. That's how I would handle that. If it was a simple yes or no question that had no bearing on anything else and then was not misleading, I would just answer yes or no. Stop the bullshit. Listen to the question. Answer the question.
Right.
Honestly. Okay. And, you know, because it makes you look ridiculous to the jury.